I believe that we have all of the XCOM members, so I'm going to call the meeting to order at, let me share my video. Not that there's much to see. So I'm starting the meeting, I'm calling the meeting to order at 8:05. So we're now in order. I'm going to share my screen briefly with the agenda. Can everybody see my agenda?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So the agenda is call to order, roll call, adoption of agenda, public comment, 3 minutes per comment. And if those that wish to do public comment would like to start raising your hand, that would be how we will call on you. Then we'll get to the call of the meeting, which is consideration of rescinding endorsement of John Alpay, discussion and adjournment. By the way, has John Alpay joined the call yet?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. I didn't see you on there. Okay, so the first order of business is the roll call. Can the secretary please take the roll?
Don Brosius.
You end with the alternate.
Hey, Rick Dawson.
Here.
Eduardo Flores.
Here.
Steve Howe. Steve, I saw you on there. Are you here? I'll go on and come back. Wendy Hewitt.
Here.
Rachel Nix.
Here.
Angela McCardle.
Here.
Leash Morrow.
Here.
Brandon Nelson.
Yeah, I'm here, even though I wish I hadn't been for that.
Jillian Olson.
Here.
Kenneth Brett Olson.
Here.
John Prosser. Don, you here? I'll come back. Boomer Shannon. Joshua Smith. Joshua Smith.
I'm here, Paul. Thanks.
Okay. I am here. My name is Paul Valander. Mimi Robeson.
I'm here.
Coming back, John Brosius.
Here.
No, wait. So going back to Steve first, is Steve here? And can everybody please mute yourself if you're not, and only unmute yourself when you're going to be talking, or I will mute all.
It might be better if the host were to mute anyone not on the XCOM.
I believe Steve is on. He is just, he's the one that sounds kind of chipmunky.
Oh, Steve, you need to call back in. You sound like Tweety Bird again. You need to come back on the call. Yeah, that is you. Okay, Steve, you need to come back in. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so Boomer Shannon, was he here or was he not here?
He did not respond, and I did not see him on the screen.
Okay, so at this point, Richard Fast, you are here, correct?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Richard Fast will be seated in place of Boomer Shannon at this point. He's an alternate. And then we also have Dawn Brosius on the call, but she is an alternate, so she won't be seated at this time. And we can start the meeting without Steve while he logs back in, but there is no such thing as an alternate for the treasurer. So, okay, the next item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Is there, and please only those that are on the XCOM say anything on this. Is there anything?
Ms. Chair,
Huh?
can I just move to adopt the agenda?
Seconded.
Yes, you can.
All right, thank you.
All right, it's been moved by Mr. Smith. Is there a second?
Second.
McCardle.
Seconded by Ms. Hewitt. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, the agenda has been adopted as presented. I am going to stop sharing my screen. And now we will be going to public comment. At this point, I only see 2 people with their hands up. So actually at this point, I once again see 2 people. If you could put, well, Judge Gray, I'll put you on the list, even though I meant hands up on the screen. But so we will be starting with Tammy Wilhelm in one moment. Howard Hart is after that. After that is Judge Gray because he raised his hand with an actual hand raise. After that is Troy Bourne, and we will add this as we go along. I want to just talk a little bit before we start this. When we go to public comment, each commenter gets only 3 minutes. If you can use less than 3 minutes, that's better. But you will be being timed, and at the end of your 3 minutes, you will be muted. So we will start with Tammy, if you'd like to go ahead. Tammy, I unmuted. Okay, you should be able to. Yeah, you're unmuted. And when it gets to your turn, I will unmute you as well.
Thank you very much.
So, go ahead.
Thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to speak with you this evening. I have to tell you that I was named on the petition that went to the San Juan City Council a little more than a week ago. And in that petition, the City Council was asked to remove me and a few of my colleagues from our posts on the Planning Commission because we had the audacity to stand up and endorse a person that we trusted and believed would do a great job for our community, and for no other reason. The reason that he cited was that we may be in violation of the Hatch Act, and since I'm not a public employee, I don't think that's possible. But that was the allegation, and for the last little more than a week, I've had to be quiet and not defend myself at all, out of fear that I might do or say something about a law that I don't understand that would put Howard Hart in some kind of legal jeopardy or lose his employment. So that said, thank you so much for inviting us to speak to you tonight. I would also tell you that I'm a person without a party. I'm a registered voter for many, many years, have affiliated with a few different parties, and always been disillusioned. And the last round, I registered to vote with no party. So this last weekend, when I learned that this meeting was going to happen, I went online to learn a little bit about the Libertarian Party. And I was stunned that the very first thing I came across was the Libertarian membership pledge. That read and spoke to my heart. I hereby certify that I do not believe in or advocate the initiation of force as a means of achieving political or social goals. And I thought, wow, I just got bullied all over the place in my position as a planning commissioner, and my friend and colleague just got bullied possibly right out of what was supposed to be a nonpartisan race. And I was frankly grateful that the people that I was going to be able to make my case in front of turns out to be the Libertarian Party. I think that you have an extraordinary opportunity to re-enfranchise 5,000 voters in the city of San Juan and give them back their opportunity to choose a candidate of their choosing, to pick someone that they believe in, and not have a candidate end up representing them who frankly tied his opponent's shoelaces together so he couldn't run the race. So I want to tell you that I appreciate that opportunity and say to you that I think the party has a chance to have a larger message, not just to me, a person without a party, but to the rest of California, to Orange County, and in particular those 5,000 voters in District 5 in San Juan Capistrano, by rescinding this endorsement and giving them the right to vote for their candidate back to them. The only concern that I have is once the California chapter, makes that decision, is that I hope that you will write a letter or influence the board of directors for the Orange County chapter and ask them to please do the same should you choose to rescind.
The 3 minutes is up, Tammy, so we'll give you 20 seconds.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think I've made my point. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. And going forward, it will be a 5-second warning, not an extra 20 seconds, because we've got a lot of people on here, I think, tonight. So the next person speaking is Howard Hart, and I will ask you to unmute yourself, please. Okay, you should be unmuted.
Yeah, I just want to mention that Krista Hart will is also asking for some time, but we're on the same feed, and I'll let her.
Okay, she can have separate time.
Okay.
I will put her after Mr. Bourne.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, distinguished committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the facts and events of what I can best describe as an attempt to disenfranchise the voters of San Juan Capistrano. I chose to run for city council because this opportunity presented itself as a way for me to continue serving my community. I had hoped and did everything in my power to ensure this race was about values and service. On Friday, September 25th at 6:55 p.m., I received an email from my opponent, Mr. Alpay, demanding a response within 48 hours. In this email, he notified me of your endorsement and, leveraging the Hatch Act, called into question the legality of my campaign. I reached out to the Office of Special Counsel the next day, but of course, Washington shuts down on the weekends. By Sunday night, Alpay filed a complaint against me with the federal government and emailed the entire San Juan Capistrano City Council, as well as my boss and my boss's boss, notifying them of his actions and calling for my removal along with 2 other commissioners who had shown their support for my campaign. This is not the first time Mr. Alpay leveraged his law degree to target me. Last month, he engineered a lawsuit against me that was thrown out of court immediately, but cost my campaign $3,500 in legal fees. The rest of his campaign has been similarly nasty. On the same day he sent his email, Mr. Alpay took out a full-page ad in a local newspaper which inaccurately defamed both myself and other members of the community. This list could continue. Until now, I've remained silent about my misgivings regarding Mr. Alpay's character. But in the last week, he has threatened the livelihood of my family, and he has gone on the offensive towards 2 other commissioners with whom he has no relationship. To use a metaphor, he has pushed me from the sidewalk into traffic, and he is now trying to get me arrested for jaywalking. I will not claim to know how Mr. Alpay truly identifies, but it seems clear that it is not particularly libertarian when it comes to the issues. His track record and platform speak for themselves, and records show he only registered as a libertarian on the same day he heard me speak about not seeking the GOP endorsement due to Hatch Act considerations 1 week prior to his threatening email and 6 days after lying to obtain your endorsement. Regardless, he is clearly weaponizing your endorsement as a means to a political end. You are faced with an important choice, as is Mr. Alpay, and I offer him this same choice. At a time of historic voter dissatisfaction with 2-party hegemony, you can choose to tolerate this charade and he can choose to pursue it, or you can choose to advance the cause of liberty in our small town. I believe the choice is clear. I look forward to tonight's conversation and will gladly answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Next, and by the way, if anybody else on this call would like to do public comment, please raise your hands on the screen. The next public commenter will be Judge Gray, which,
Thank you.
wait, you're still, there you are.
This is Judge Gray. I don't know the particular people involved in this. I do know that Mr. Alpay joined us when I was involved with a AMA, basically with the Huntington Beach Libertarian Party. And he said, as I understand it, that he was impressed by libertarian values. I think that under these circumstances, and again, I don't know the background, that it would be appropriate for Mr. Alpay, given the circumstances, to issue the following statement. I appreciate the endorsement of the Libertarian Party of California and the Libertarian Party of Orange County, but under the circumstances, accepting an endorsement from a political party in a nonpartisan race would actually bring unfair consequences in this election. So I believe that, again, appreciating the Libertarian ostensible endorsement, I have decided not to accept either endorsement and allow the voters to take place. Life is complicated. I think this is probably giving the benefit of the doubt what he believes and what he should do. So I think that is what I would recommend Mr. Alpay to do, and he will be able to join us in libertarian circles. We don't use laws, technicalities, or otherwise to take advantage of opponents, and this is a nonpartisan race, and I hope Mr. Alpay adopts this recommendation. Those are my thoughts, and I turn the chair back to you, Mimi.
Thank you, Judge Gray. Next, we have Troy Bourne, and I may be saying your last name wrong. I hope I'm not, but you should be able to unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted, and it's born, just like baby being born. I usually don't have to do that anymore ever since those Matt Damon movies, especially when I tell people I look exactly like Matt Damon. But now my video's turned off, so I guess that secret's out of the bag. I don't really look like Matt. Like Tammy, first of all, I guess I want to start. I don't have prepared remarks, but I do want to say that what the judge just said, I think, is a great solution, and it gives everybody a chance to assume the best and not assume the worst. And it puts us back to where I think everybody wants to be, which is allowing the voters of San Juan Capistrano an opportunity to exercise their judgment in the election. Like the woman who spoke at the beginning, I also don't have a party. I'm not a Democrat or Republican or belong to any other party. I am currently serving as the mayor of San Juan Capistrano, but I do not have a lot of experience in politics. A couple of years ago, I ran for office because our city had become dysfunctional with contention and discord and elected officials attacking each other at the dais, the public attacking them, and we had just failed to be able to function as a city, and I ran in an effort to try to bring some decorum and stability back. And I think with the other members of the current city council, we've been able to do that. There's a nice spirit in our private and public meetings. And I was concerned when I saw the activities that you're discussing tonight happen, because it felt like it was a hard jog back in the other direction. I think that the public is seeing this for, I think the lens that most of the city is seeing this through, in my opinion, is that a technical infraction is being taken advantage of to remove the voters' power in this election. And I think that the reason that is the perception is a simple question of, well, when did Mr. Hart break the rules? It feels like Mr. Hart checked the rules, asked for opinions, and walked onto the field of play with the best intentions, and then somebody drew a line behind him and accused him of crossing that line after the fact. It feels that way, and I think it particularly, was disheartening when we received as a city council, and I'm here representing myself, not the city council in any formal capacity, but when we received the request to not only disenfranchise him and his volunteer service, but also those who supported him, it felt like a blast from the past, from these more hostile, volatile times in our city. And I'm optimistic that we can get past this. But my fear is that if it's left unchecked and uncorrected, that the Libertarian Party will be dragged into the news because of the endorsement, but will stay in the news if, in fact, worst case scenario is there's a recall election and he's the first Libertarian candidate who's recalled with an endorsement, because I don't think that the public is seeing this as a fair play. I really like the judge's idea of this as a way to put it back. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mayor Bourne. And by the way, I don't watch movies, so
Oh, that's too bad. Those are good ones.
Sorry, I just really don't. So, okay, the next person to speak would be Krista Hart. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Krista. I'm Howard's daughter, and I've had the honor of helping my father on the campaign trail this far. I want to speak tonight about what my family has been put through the past few weeks and the gravity of the situation that comes before your committee. I want to start by expressing my gratitude for the Libertarian Party of California and the people who comprise this committee. I'm humbled and I'm honored by the speed and the seriousness with which you have reacted to this event. I got involved in politics when I was 14 years old. I started by volunteering on campaigns and have since worked on Capitol Hill and for nonprofits around the globe. Never in my 8 years of political experience, and even in the 4 years that I spent in Washington, have I encountered someone who feels so entitled to a political office that they are content with jeopardizing a family's livelihood and a city's ability to choose their own government. My father decided to seek office because he wanted to continue his tradition of public service. We have put a lot of labor and a lot of love into this campaign, and we're very proud of the work we have done. Now, Mr. Alpe has decided to attempt to get my father fired, to disenfranchise the voters of San Juan, and to retaliate against 3 appointed commissioners in one fell swoop. The disturbances do not cease there. I was shocked by a local newspaper article on Friday in which Mr. Alpe submitted blatantly false information about the activities of our now paused campaign. His claims were easily disprovable by something as simple as a set of timestamps, but they were nonetheless published, and I was curious as to how someone could so nonchalantly submit defamatory falsehoods to the press. For myself and my family, it feels as if we are simply in Mr. Alpe's way to what he perceives as all-important political power. He has no consideration towards the victims of his unethical uses of the law, and let's be clear, legality does not always predicate morality. I have witnessed the devastation that one of his lawsuits and subsequent public defamatory remarks have wreaked on other community members. For me personally, his most recent actions have caused massive panic attacks and feelings of paranoia because I truly believe there are no boundaries. I am genuinely horrified by these attacks against my family, and I am yearning for this to no longer be part of my life. I know other members of our household feel the same. This goes beyond politics. These are persistent attempts to harm our family. This is not how public service should be conducted. In fact, true leaders would never engineer a situation wherein they are depriving voters of choice out of fear that they might not be selected. This is antithetical to the fundamental beliefs of representative government. The residents of San Juan do not deserve to be punished with a perpetrator of such intimidation on their city council. The Libertarian Party of California has a choice tonight. The ability of San Juan residents to choose their own representation is at stake. I'm confident in the values and the principles of this party, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. And like my father said, I reflect that challenge and that ask to the Alpe campaign.
Yeah, 5 seconds.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hart. I do see that Wendy Hewitt's hand is up. However, you're on the XCOM, so I don't know that you want to speak during public comment. You can if you'd like, but you
I would
will
just
also
like
have
to
time
see if Mr. Alpe is going to speak. I would like to hear from him.
Well, he will be the first to speak when we get to that agenda item.
Okay.
So is there anybody else that would like to speak during public comment? If so, speak now.
Yes, Art Sanchez, I would like to speak.
Okay, Mr. Sanchez.
Okay.
Yes,
Could you show your face? Could you show your face, Mr. Sanchez, or are you too afraid to do that? Show us your face, Art. Face your.
I'm sorry. Who's requesting it?
Yeah, who is requesting
it?
it?
And I'll put up mine.
Roger, please mute yourself. I don't know who you are, but this is Art's time to speak, and he doesn't have to put up his face if he doesn't want to.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Art, your time will start now.
My name is Art Sanchez, and I'm a registered Republican and a past 2-term president of the South Orange County Republican Assembly. I am also a volunteer for John Alpe, Libertarian candidate for San Juan Capistrano City Council. Candidly, I would tell you I'm at a loss in understanding the urgency and reason for this meeting. There is a false narrative being disseminated by the Hart campaign that John sought out the Libertarian endorsement solely to use as a tool to strong arm Howard out of the race. John and I have been discussing securing a party affiliation for over a year now. In 2019, John was offered a Republican membership and a Democratic membership and turned them both down. These are available to John way before the San Juan Capistrano City Council race. As John told me in many conversations regarding party affiliation, I just can't see myself as a Republican or Democrat anymore. He suggested we explore the Libertarian Party. I told him I was good friends with Art Pedroza, a Libertarian, who would speak with him. Art will confirm many conversations he and I had about the Libertarian Party and the possibility of John and I becoming members. I believe Art has signed a declaration to that fact. This has been in the works for quite some time. Mr. Hart and his campaign have been spreading the narrative that John just decided to become a Libertarian once he found out that Howard could not run for council in a partisan race. They based their accusations on events that occurred on the dates of September 18th and the 20th as to when John decided to pursue the Libertarian Party membership and endorsement. Declarations will confirm that I inquired in July on behalf of John about the Libertarian membership and endorsement. John was hoping to have the endorsement much earlier, but there seems to have been a delay on the part of the Libertarian Party. John now professes to be a proud Libertarian. Ms. Hart now wants to destroy all the hard work John and I have put in, researching and attending events of the Libertarian Party to justify his important decision. Ms. Hart states Howard is bound by the Hatch Act restrictions, which bar him from running in a partisan race. Most city races are considered nonpartisan, but the U.S. Code, however, considers a race partisan if any candidate receives partisan endorsements or support. Ms. Hart's claim that Howard is bound by the Hatch Act is obviously false. If he were a federal employee who was bound and respected the Hatch Act, he would have already withdrawn from the race instead of spinning the constitutional right of a U.S. citizen in order to benefit himself, a government federal employee who is running a stealth campaign. John is the real one here who has taken a risk with his action for law and order. Once Mr. Hart enlightened John about his restrictions at a Lincoln Club event. All right. In closing, this is nothing more than an American citizen who has found his party, has asked him to join him in this journey of American freedom. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sanchez. I do not see any further hands raised. If there are no further hands raised for public comment, we will go on to the agenda item, which is consideration of rescinding the endorsement for Mr. Alpay. So,
Point of order, Madam Chair.
is there any? Yes, Mr. Flanagan.
As I noted in an email last night to the executive committee, it appears to me that our endorsement of Mr. Alpay for this seat at the September 12th, 2020 meeting of the executive committee was in violation of LPC bylaw 12, section 1, due to the fact that Mr. Alpay was not a registered Libertarian Party voter at that time. The records indicate that he registered as a Libertarian Party voter on the 18th of September, 6 days later. So I think we have a problem here that we need to address.
Are you making that point of order now?
Yes.
Okay, there's been a point of order that I think that anybody on the list was raised yesterday. I have, and I said I would in fact have a ruling by the time of this meeting, which I do. And I will share my screen because I wrote it out. This will be part of the minutes after the fact. And I will read it for the record. So give me one moment to share my screen. I will make this as quick as possible. So the background, the Libertarian Party of California LPC Executive Committee, EC, is authorized in the party's bylaws to endorse Libertarian candidates for partisan and nonpartisan elections. Our third quarter meeting was held on September 12th, 2020, and candidate endorsements was on the agenda for that meeting. At the September 12, 2020 meeting, we endorsed a number of candidates, which included Mr. John Elpay for San Juan Capistrano City Council District 5. At the time of the meeting, I was under the misguided impression that Mr. Elpay, who had been registered no party preference in the state of California, had changed his registration to Libertarian and was qualified for our endorsement. Briefly, I will get to why I was under that impression in a moment. I later realized that Mr. Elpay was still not registered as Libertarian, so I contacted him, at which point he sent proof of his change of registration to Libertarian, which occurred on September 18th, 2020. At that point, I determined that any breach had been rectified and did nothing further regarding this matter. Next, I'll go briefly through the timeline. On September 9th, it was announced that we would be having our endorsements at our meeting. Also on September 9th, Mr. George Reese, Vice Chair of the Libertarian Party of Orange County, contacted me via email letting us know there were 5 candidates running for office in Orange County and stated he would contact them about the possibility of receiving endorsements. On September 10th, Mr. Reese sent an email with a list of 5 candidates, which included Mr. Elpay. On September 10th, Mr. Reese sent an email to the 5 candidates, which included Mr. Elpay and copied me, giving them the opportunity to be endorsed. On September 10th, I sent an email to Mr. Reese to explain that although the county organization may endorse candidates that are registered no party preference or decline to state, the LPEC cannot. I say that being Mr. Elpay was currently not registered Libertarian, he would not be eligible to be considered for endorsement. On September 11th, Mr. Elpay responded to Mr. Reese's email stating he wished to be considered for endorsement and sent a brief statement that he asked to be submitted to the LPEC during the meeting. On September 12th, during the meeting, I put Mr. Elpay's name up for endorsement and read his statement. I was of the mistaken belief that Mr. Elpay had been made aware that he was required to be a registered Libertarian and assumed that his sending the email asking for endorsement meant he had changed his voter's registration. To be clear, neither Mr. Reese nor Mr. Elpay told me that the voter registration had been changed. It was simply my assumption. When I announced to the EC that he was up for consideration, I stated the issue with registration had been remedied. That was solely my mistake. On September 12th, at the close of the agenda item, it was announced that all endorsed candidates should forward their information to our webmaster to be included on the candidate page of the website. On September 25th, I realized that several of the endorsed candidates had not been added to the website. At that time, I went through the list and to send out an email reminding them to send their information to the webmaster. At that time, I checked Mr. Elpay's voter registration to make sure his registration had been changed. When I saw he was still registered as no party reference in our records, I sent him an email asking about his registration, and he responded with an email which included his California voter registration receipt showing his registration had been updated on September 18th. At that time, I considered the breach to have been addressed. On September 25th, I sent an email to all endorsed candidates, including Mr. Elpay, that they had not been updated on our website, asking them to forward their bio. On September 28th, that's when I was contacted by Ms. Hart regarding the allegations that Mr. Elpay was using the Hatch Act to disqualify Howard Hart, the opponent for the City Council District 5 race. Ms. Hart sent documentation regarding this allegation, which I forwarded to the EC. I then had conversations with several members of the EC who all stated that this issue would need to be addressed and should be done as soon as possible. On September 28th, I sent notification to the chair that the chair was calling a special meeting of the EC to discuss these allegations as well as possible reconsideration of Mr. Elpay's endorsement. On October 5th, the LP secretary sent the email raising the issue that he just explained, that Mr. Elpay was not qualified to have received the party's endorsement at the time. And I've then included the email that Mr. Valandham sent, which everybody involved should have gotten. So my findings: after receiving Mr. Valandham's email, I researched the LPC bylaws, run our 12th edition, and consulted a parliamentarian in preparation of this point of order being made. Typically, a point of order must be made at the time of the breach, timeliness requirement, and I've given the RONAR reference. However, there are certain exceptions to the timeliness requirement, and those exceptions have to do with it's a continuing breach of the bylaws. That's one of the things. A main motion has been adopted that conflicts with the bylaws or constitution of the organization. The question then becomes whether this is a violation of the LPC bylaws, and if so, is it creating a continuing breach? Our bylaws are very clear that the executive committee may endorse any registered Libertarian candidate for public office, or it may rescind its endorsement of any candidate for public office. I've added emphasis. Therefore, it is clear that the executive committee, to make an endorsement, the candidate must be registered Libertarian. Endorsing a candidate that is registered no party preference, declined to state, is a clear violation of our governing documents. The next thing to consider is if the action taken to endorse a candidate that was not a registered Libertarian, but at the time of the ruling, he is a registered Libertarian, is a continuing breach of the bylaws. There's no clear reference to endorsement of candidates in RONAR. However, there are citations for elections, which could be considered the same as an endorsement, as it requires the elements of an election as well as a term, which the term would end at the end of the election. Time at which an election takes effect. An election to an office becomes final immediately if the candidate is present and does not decline, or if it is absent but has consented to his candidacy. In this case, Mr. Alpay was present at the time of he was not present at the time of the endorsement. However, his statement sent asking he be considered would be considered his consent. However, an election may be contested in certain circumstances. An election may be contested, and this is also from RONAR, only by raising a point of order. And again, the general rule is that a point of order has to be made timely. However, there is an exception that says that if an individual does not meet the qualifications for the post established in the bylaws, his or her election is tantamount to adoption of a main motion that conflicts with the bylaws. And as I said earlier, that would make this null and void. So, from the above, it seems clear that Mr. Alpay was not qualified for the endorsement at the time of the LPC meeting on September 12th. However, at the time of this meeting, he has now met the qualifications for endorsement. At the time of the endorsement, our governing documents were breached. However, it could be argued that the breach ceased on September 18th when Mr. Alpay changed his voter registration to Libertarian. The call of this meeting is consideration of the endorsement status of Mr. Alpay, and whether that consideration is to endorse or rescind endorsement, the call has not materially changed. I know that was long, but I wanted to give the background. My ruling is that the ruling of the chair is that the endorsement that was made on September 12, 2020 is now null and void, having been in violation of our bylaws and governing documents. However, if Mr. Alpay still wishes to seek the endorsement of the Libertarian Party of California, this meeting will continue forward on the basis of considering Mr. Alpay for endorsement in his campaign for San Juan Capistrano City Council District 5. And that question will be left to Mr. Alpay. And I will stop sharing my screen. But that is my ruling. As I stated, there could be an argument made that the breach had stopped. So it is conceivable that somebody on the executive committee could appeal my ruling, but that is my ruling. So that brings us to the next question, which is Mr. Alpay still seeking our endorsement? Mr. Alpay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to consult, ask for a 5-minute recess to consult with my advisors regarding this item.
I would see no reason not to allow that. I see Ms. McCardle's hand is up, but first let me ask, is there any, or actually Ms. McCardle, why is your hand up? Unmute yourself. Did you have something you wanted to do first?
Yeah, before we went to a point of order, I thought we were going into discussion and I was ready to discuss this. So I'm happy to hear Mr. Alpay first.
Okay, all right. Is there any objection by the executive committee on taking a 5-minute recess while Mr. Alpay consults his associates? Okay, I'm hearing no
Would it be
objection.
permissible to bring up a point of something in that period that's of an unrelated nature?
Possibly, but it would have to be germane to the call of the meeting.
It has to do with the meeting.
Order.
Should we give it a try and you can either rule it out of order or not?
We can give it a try.
All right. I would move that we immediately discontinue the live stream of this event and then delete it from our social media assets due to the fact that some of the platforms would consider some of the material at the beginning of the meeting to be prohibited content. And I don't think that we need to give them another reason to attack our pages or our reach by finding us in violation of their community standards. So I think that it would be in the best interest of the party to do that. And anyone who's interested can request a video. I mean, we're recording as well. I think that
We are
would be the
recording.
way to handle it.
Has anybody been watching the feed on live? And by the way, as we discussed this, I don't think that we need to be. I will say that we are in fact in recess for 5 minutes. So, Mr. Alpe, if you'd like to, we won't be dealing with anything to do with anything other than this during that 5 minutes.
Jeff was watching it.
Is there any comments or anything that's happened on the live stream?
No,
I mean, is any,
I mean, there was a dude with a swastika, and there's like glimpses of pornography. It would probably be in our best interest to remove it.
okay, well, I will go ahead and I will go ahead and yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop the live stream now. It has been stopped.
Can we get someone on the social media team to go in and delete it real quick?
That would be me, the social media chair.
Angela, would
Okay,
you be a
Angela, if
dear?
you could delete that. Okay, what we can do is one of
Thank
two
you.
things. We could start the live stream again, but I
don't
don't
see
know
a
that
need
that would
to.
make sense. Or I can make sure that this is posted, being that it's being recorded, I can make sure that it's posted on social media as well as YouTube at the conclusion of the meeting.
That would be good if we can remove the portion that involve pornography and racial slurs as well as the Nazi flag. That would probably be better.
Yeah, I wish we would have gotten to him a little bit faster. I mean, I hope that that wouldn't get us in violation of community standards since it was obviously not intentional, but.
No, but
But
I
I
don't
see your
really want to
concern.
tempt fate given how many people have been getting removed from the LP lately.
That is true.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks, everybody.
well,
I'm good.
thank you for that. And that was a good point of something. And by the way, we're in recess, but at National Convention, I started doing points of something and people kind of were like, oh, that's really, that's great. I realized I actually stole that from Mary Jingle because at our convention, she made a point of something. So I must have had it in my mind somewhere and I was stealing Mary Jingle's point of something. Just thought I'd share that. She might be watching. So at this point, we are in recess. I said 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and just say that we'll come back to order at 8:55, which gives a little bit more than 5 minutes. Is there any objection to that? Okay, so we'll come back to order in 6 minutes.
So no, Mary Jingle was not watching, but she's in the other room. What was your comment about her?
Well, what it was that the national convention at one point, I didn't know what I was exactly doing, and I got up and I said, I have a point of something, and people loved
okay.
that. And I ended up doing it more than once, and then I realized that at our state convention at one point, Mary got up and she made a point of something. So I think somehow I must have liked it so much I stole it from her.
Okay. No, she's actually in the other room, but she was in the middle of doing square dance, calling a virtual square dance when the meeting was going on. And that's why I'm on the phone rather than on that computer. But now that's over, so I'm going to switch over to the computer so I can see people's faces.
Okay, well, I knew you were on the call, and I just figured I would say that when Brandon made his point of something, so it reminded me.
No, that's fine. I just missed that because I was trying to do. Anyway, so I'm gonna try reconnecting through that.
Okay, well, we'll be back in order in another 5 minutes.
Yeah. So let me find the.
Mimi, while we're in recess, did we get a second to Mr. Nelson's motion? I didn't hear one.
It was after we were in recess. I don't think it had to be a motion. It was a point of something. It wasn't. I mean, he kind of made a motion, but I think his point of something was well taken. So
Good
I had
enough.
already said recess. So it's, yeah, you don't need to put that in. And that was very unfortunate that that person did that.
I wasn't watching. I was only listening, but it sounded like wasn't all that happening before the meeting actually got called to order?
It was before it got called to order, but it was just after I started the live stream.
Oh, but I mean, in terms of putting a copy of the video somewhere, you can just chop it off up until the point, when the actual meeting starts.
Oh,
Official
yeah,
start.
yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, yeah.
So you don't have to you don't have to like bleep it out. You can just edit the video down to when it starts. When the
That was
meeting
my
officially
hope,
starts.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we can do. And it was unfortunate because when it started, I couldn't figure out with all the people on the call who it was to remove them. So that's why I'd been at first, trying to know who was coming in when. But hey, it's always an unfortunate possibility that can happen with open meetings.
Yeah,
I mean,
password isn't very much protection if it's published all over the web.
Precisely. And that's why
All
we
right.
also had the waiting room, but he got let in by mistake.
All right, can you let me in now? It's waiting for.
Oh yeah, I'm actually away from my computer. Brent, are you there? Can you let Mr. Dean in? If not, I'll be back at my computer in another minute or two.
All right. I'll just stay on the phone until that happens.
Okay, sorry about that.
Somebody did something.
Must have been Brent because he's our co-host.
I think Brent is in the kitchen away from the computer.
I just sat down in front of the computer.
Okay, Joe, I think
Sorry
you
about
can pick
that.
up your phone.
Sorry about that. I will turn that video.
Yeah.
Huh, I just turned that other speaker off. Yeah.
We're fine. We're just fine.
I could have sworn that was Brent just speaking in his usual voice.
Oh, you
Well, it was funny when I thought somebody was on the meeting that shouldn't have been, and it was actually Mr. Haug and his Tweety Bird. By the way, he did come back onto the meeting, right?
Yeah, I'm here. Do I sound okay?
You sound perfect.
Thank you.
That hadn't happened for a while, but when you sound like Tweety Bird, you really do sound like Tweety Bird.
Hi, Steve.
Can you change my name? I apparently can't change my own name.
I'll change it. Or if Brent, if you're still there. We're going to come back to order in a minute, or 2 minutes actually. But I am truly stepping away for a moment.
Just gave us enough time to get another drink.
Yeah, with the chair's permission, may I please apologize for my earlier interruption? I am a Marine and I make every attempt to be polite until I reach my limit. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I was muted for a moment, but thank you for that apology. I appreciate it. Okay,
All right, I'm going to hang out my phone and switch over to the other.
Okay, and your name has been changed.
Still says Mary Jingle on my Jingle on my screen. But all right, I'm going to hang up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it is now 8:55. Mr. Alpay, are you back? Okay, we'll give Mr. Alpay another minute. Mr. Alpay? I've asked him to unmute. We'll give him another minute. No, we will, because
Give me.
Mr. Alpay,
Yes, ma'am.
are you ready? Can we call back to order?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we're back in order at 8:57. Mr. Alpay?
You know, Madam Chair, if I may say really briefly here, I came to this party very sincerely. Came in good faith a number of months ago, reflected in the information material I submitted. So this assertion that I sought the Libertarian Party endorsement for purposes of taking advantage of the Hatch Act is not truthful. The facts bear itself out. Just for benefit of members of the committee, I refer them to Exhibit O. I know people on this call don't have that, but it's an email exchange between me and Mr. Reese of the Libertarian Party of Orange County, where he notified me that pursuant to the rules that, if I may read really briefly here, he said on September 20th, as to the state endorsements, I haven't heard anything since the meeting, so don't know the status, but I have found out that the state party has different rules than we have in OC, and they are not allowed to endorse anyone in the office who isn't registered Libertarian, even for non-party offices. I'm sorry I didn't check that before contacting you about it. Now, this is obviously consistent with everything else that you said there, but one thing that I see here is, he said later to me at 5:30 p.m. on September 17th, he read my answers to the Libertarian Party of Orange County answers, and he said, quote, "Your responses to the questionnaire make me wonder why you aren't registered Libertarian." Answer after that is on September 17th at 9:50 p.m. I said, "It is ironic that you make a comment about me not being registered as a Libertarian. Yesterday, I told my wife that after listening to a few of Judge Gray's Zoom meetings, I decided that I'm going to re-register from NPP to Libertarian." This was well in advance of any statement made by Mr. Hart with respect to the Hatch Act. So the assertion that I use the Libertarian Party on a technicality to knock out my opponent is not true. I heard what Judge Gray said here earlier on the call. I don't know if he's still on or not. Those words mean something to me. And I was prepared to step down and did not seek the endorsement. However, I do wish to state that watching Mr. Hart and his daughter sit there eating popcorn, watching the spectacle that he's made out of these proceedings, I find to be personally offensive. Now, members of this committee may take exception to the manner in which I, quote unquote, went about enforcing the Hatch Act, notifying members of the council, and including Ms. Wilhelm as well as another individual. The fact of the matter is, libertarians do not initiate force, but they are entitled to engage in self-defense. What Mr. Hart references is a letter that I put on my website calling him out for using litigation. He used a strong effort to characterize me as quote unquote very litigious, and includes in that a lawsuit that was filed against him recently. I was not a party to that lawsuit. So for him to throw it in my face is not a factually correct statement on his part. It's misrepresentation. The litigation that he does refer to is the fact that I have indeed commenced litigation against my neighbor. My neighbor has installed cameras in my backyard, in her backyard, or their backyard, and focuses on the activities of my children. My children found that to be offensive, insulted, and so what they did was that they moved to the front yard. My neighbor instead installed 2 additional cameras in the front yard to monitor their activities. I make no apologies for engaging in litigation. It's cost me $85,000. You know, what would you do if your children were involved? So was that, you know, a response to Mr. Hart's activities? Maybe it was heavy-handed. We could debate the merits of that. But I came to this party in good faith. You know, this was a long path. This is not something that happened overnight. And I took Judge Gray's words to heart. But you know what? I feel that I joined this party in good faith. And so for that reason, I'm going to submit right now for the party to consider to endorse my candidacy or not. I will make myself available for any questions or question my conduct. But, you know, one thing I do want to state very clear, I have at no point misrepresented my status or my voter registration, and I have done nothing to deceive anybody in this party as to my status or my intent.
Thank you, Mr. Alpay. And I will go to Ms. McCardle next, but I do want to say that I do take responsibility for assuming what I assumed and not realizing it until after the fact. So I do apologize for that. I made a mistake on that portion of it, and I own that, and there you go. Ms. McCardle, you should be able to unmute yourself.
As a litigator and a politician, I'm not inclined to think that litigation is a violation of the non-aggression principle, even if it's done in poor taste and is a little bit tacky, or maybe what some of us would consider an underhanded technique. As things stand right now, as a voting member on the XCOM, I'm not inclined to vote to rescind any endorsements unless someone shows me an actual threat, something that shows words like, I will file this to get you unemployed or go after you personally. You know, I'm sorry that politics are so dirty and that people get their reputations damaged and things worse than that happen. That's where I stand right now. I'm open, but you'll have.
Okay, and at this point, we are in consideration of endorsement, which would actually need a motion to endorse. Is there such a motion?
I motion to endorse
That
John
is,
Apley, Edwater Flores.
well, no, unfortunately, that has to be a motion from this board.
Okay.
I see hands raised. Ms. Hewitt?
Hi, John. I would like to know, why wouldn't you just go through the motions and put all this out there in the public so everybody knew about what was going on in concerns with Mr. Hart, and just let the voters decide?
With respect to which? Are you referring to the Hatch Act?
I mean, why are you going after him specifically? Why don't you just let the voters decide? Why don't you do it just like the normal? I mean, go out there, tell everybody what your story is, and have them decide who they want to put into office.
Well, that's the way I entered this race. But, you
So
know.
what I mean,
Oh,
why would you go after him like this?
Why would I go after him? He went
I
after my family.
let me interrupt for one moment. It was actually Eduardo Flores that was making that motion. I thought that it was Art Sanchez. So a motion has been made to endorse Mr. Appley. Is there a second to that motion?
Point of information. I
Who
thought
is that?
I thought he was already endorsed. Why would we be making a motion to endorse?
I don't know if you just listened to that big long thing I did for the ruling of the chair, but he has not been endorsed. That was null and void, as it was a continuing breach of our rules.
Okay, all right. I guess I misinterpreted the conclusion of that.
Yeah. No, we are now, this meeting has shifted from being, it's materially the same, but it's shifted from being reconsideration to consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Which is why it needs a motion. Okay, Mr. Alpay, I'll let you go ahead and finish what your answer was to Ms. Hewitt, and I also saw that Mr. Naranjo's hand was up.
Well, I believe I've submitted my statement.
Okay. All right, Mr. Naranjo, did you want to, is there any?
I saw that Mr. Hart has his hand up, so I'd like to hear what he has to say first.
Okay, is there any objection from the board to hear Mr. Hart? Hearing none, Mr. Hart? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I don't claim to know Mr. Alpay's political leaning. I do know that at one point, he decided to weaponize his endorsement from you, or presumed an endorsement from you, as a means of getting me out of the race. Now, he can make all the accusations he wants. He can make all the denials he wants. As a matter of fact, in his earlier lawsuit with me, he mentioned his neighbor across the street mentions that he visited my LinkedIn profile. I actually have a screen capture that shows that it was somebody from Mr. Alpay's company, employer, who was visiting my LinkedIn profile at the same time that lawsuit says that his neighbor across the street did. And so I think he's being a little fabulous with the truth there. That said, I'm not going to question the sincerity of his libertarian beliefs. But as I understand it, one of the primary tenets of libertarianism, as was mentioned by my colleague Tammy Wilhelm, is that they will not initiate force to advance their political and social goals. And he's clearly decided to do that. And I think it's unfortunate. And I reiterate again that the Libertarian Party has an opportunity to show where you stand and what you're about, or you can be part of this particular event.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hart. I
Madam
know
Chair,
that, yes.
it seems we're in discussion now. We had a motion from Mr. Flores. I don't recall hearing a second. Did you?
No, but I let them continue on with discussion because actually we're in discussion per the agenda, so we didn't actually need the motion at that time. I apologize. So if there is a second, it can be offered. However, if there's not, we can continue discussion a little bit longer to get back there.
Can you repeat the motion, Madam Chair?
It was Eduardo Flores moved to endorse Mr. Alpay.
Well, I think that would bring this to a conclusion one way or the other, so I will second the motion.
Okay, it's been seconded. I still believe that we're in discussion though, so I will, if there's no objection, so it has been moved and seconded, we are in discussion. Is there, who's the Beamer person, Beamer 2 that had their hand up?
That's me, Steve Bemerwald. Sorry about the missed name. Oh, I don't know if you can hear
First,
me.
is there any objection? Is there any objection from the board to hearing from I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name.
Steve Bemerwald.
Madam Chair, I realize
Bemerwald.
I'm not a member of the board, but I mean, this is highly unusual for an endorsement to have members of other parties to have the right to speak on a topic, on the topic.
How do you know I'm not a member of the Libertarian Party?
My motion stands, Madam Chair.
You're not a voting member of this body. I left it to this body to decide, and no offense, but we have to be clear. There's only 15 voting members on this call. So is there any objection from the voting members on this call to hear from this gentleman? Hearing none, go ahead.
Howard Hart is a good friend of mine, and we are politically polar opposites. I've been involved in politics in San Juan for better than 10 years and have always been involved because local politics aren't red or blue or whatever color libertarians are. Because it's a nonpartisan, it's just what's right for the town. I've known Howard for a long time, and Howard was the obvious best choice to most people in town. To see Mr. Alpay use the system with the Hatch Act and whatever other tricks he's got up his sleeve is sickening to me. It's disenfranchising 5,000 voters in San Juan. And if you guys let this stand, I think it's unconscionable. I think you should go with the judge's suggestion. It's too bad Mr. Alpay couldn't do that. But if this thing causes harm to Howard's family or this election, I will think much less of the Libertarian Party. And if I wasn't a Democrat, I would probably be a Libertarian. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And from this point forward, I'm going to say that comments such as that would have been appropriate during public comment. But now we are truly in discussion of Mr. Alpay's endorsement.
I'm sorry,
So,
I didn't think they would be necessary.
fair enough, but I'm just going to say that from this point forward, that will not be allowed. If you have something pertinent to add, but if it's something that should have been done at public comment, it's not appropriate at this time. Next, we have Mr. Naranjo, who's the chair of the Orange County Libertarian Party. Is there any objection from this board to hearing from Mr. Naranjo? Hearing none, go ahead, Mr. Naranjo.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. I have a question for the Hart campaign. So going over all these documents that your campaign sent over, I'm wondering if the OSC has issued a ruling yet as far as whether or not under the Hatch Act, this would be a partisan, or this would be changed from a nonpartisan to a partisan election.
Mr. Hart, you can go ahead and answer.
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. First of all, I want to discuss a little bit about the Hatch Act. And I don't know that Mr. Alpay is aware of what he's unleashed onto my family. If I am found in violation of the Hatch Act, the most likely punishment for me is losing my job and a several tens of $1,000s fine for the federal government. To say this is not use of force or a violent act, as Ms. McCardle suggests, is an unfortunate characterization, and I ask you to search your conscience on that. As far as the Office of Special Counsel, we found out about this particular accusation on his intentions on Friday. Quite honestly, my understanding of the Hatch Act at the time was that for it to be a Hatch Act violation, it had to be a party where the president received at least one electoral college. Knowing that Mr. Johnson and Mr. Weld did not receive an electoral college vote in the previous election, I didn't take it as seriously as I should. And I think my initial email to the Hatch Act lawyer on that Saturday reflected that. As we researched it through Sunday, we realized that this was a bigger problem than we had determined, and that in fact it was a legitimate complaint. we attempted to contact my Hatch Act contact. Of course, everybody in DC is working from home right now. And so you're kind of stuck with the numbers you have. And so I called the particular attorney who I was trying to reach, and she did not work on Monday. In the meantime, we reached out to the Libertarian Party because, quite frankly, we were confused that we didn't see Mr. Alpay's note on your website, and that's, I think, what Krista started her conversation off with you, Ms. Robson, was hey, did you guys actually endorse this guy? And so that kind of got that conversation started because we were all a little bit confused. So Tuesday morning, in the meantime, as it became clear to us on Monday, by the end of Monday, you had scheduled an executive board meeting for tonight. I passed that information to the Office of Special Counsel Attorney Sherry Bosman on I think late Monday, and on Tuesday around 11 o'clock our time, she called me and she said it's our preference to wait until we see what the Libertarian Party does in order before we make a decision. My question then to her was, okay, so we don't have an advisory opinion right now. I said, okay, I'm concerned obviously about my job and my future, and I want to stay within the construct of the laws. We've ceased our campaigning, and should we continue to cease our campaigning? If we don't cease our campaigning, if we go back to campaigning, because let's face it, this is a very crucial week. The ballots are being mailed out right now. Everybody's receiving them, and like was suggested before, I have my shoelaces tied together. And she said, and so I asked her, is there the possibility of increased, do I incur the risk of increased penalty if I were to continue campaigning while we wait for the Libertarian Party to make the decision and in advance of your ruling? She said, this is Tuesday, she said, yes, there's that possibility. And so Tuesday evening, Krista and I drove around all the street signs, at least that we could find, and I think Steve Emerwald got a couple of them the next day, were pulled up out of the ground. Anything that was on public property. Anything on private property, that's not our decision to make. That's the property owners. We believe in property rights. We've shut down our Facebook account. We've shut down our all social media. We've shut down our website. I've received checks that I have not cashed. I have responded to people inquiring about my positions on certain issues of interest to them with an explanation of this Hatch Act litigation underway and how I apologize, but I cannot answer that question at this time. We have ceased all campaign activity. And so it's already had a material effect on my ability to compete in this race. Now, the good news is, as word is spread of this particular action, I've also received many expressions of goodwill, including from some of my opponent's erstwhile supporters. But that doesn't do me any good, ultimately. You have a great opportunity here, again, to do the right thing. Allow the people of San Juan Capistrano to choose who their city council member is. It may not mean much to the big world, but
so just really quickly, I think you're saying that the OSC has not issued a ruling and you don't know when or if they're going to issue a ruling? I just want to clarify.
I apologize. They have expressed their interest in waiting to hear how the Libertarian Party of California and the Libertarian Party of Orange County rule before they make their decision.
And if we do not, well, if the Libertarian Party of California doesn't do anything this evening, and I can tell you that the Libertarian Party of Orange County, it's going to take at least a few days for something to happen. What happens then? Is the OSC going to continue to wait? I would think that if this is such an urgent issue, that you would actually try and encourage them to make a decision rather quickly, because depending on their decision, this whole process is kind of moot, right? Because if they don't rule it to be a violation, none of this really matters.
Well, I think they're waiting to see what happens, and I think, quite honestly, their decision is going to greatly depend on how you fall.
Okay, thank you. I think that went beyond the answer. I think that if I'm understanding correctly, the bottom line answer is that the Office of Special Counsel is doing a wait and see to see what happens. And so in the interim, all you know is that you can no longer campaign. I will actually ask an additional question, though, because I think that this is something that I think Mr. Naranjo was getting at, is that if this doesn't happen, and you said that you have the material harm of, possibly losing your job, possibly having tens of thousands of dollars of fines, would those things happen regardless of you discontinuing your campaign, or would they happen anyways?
My impression from talking with OSC is they're not out to hunt anybody down, and they're willing to show patience in this matter as long as I stay within the letter of the law. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Alpay in a newspaper article made I will say, an errant assumption. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, or an errant statement, when he said that I continued campaigning through the weekend, when in fact, timestamps simply indicate that no, that community service announcement came out 40 minutes before we received before his email was sent. And in fact, his campaign manager, who he claimed we shotgunned it to all over the world, had signed up for our newsletter under her maiden name on April 10th or 13th of this year.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I think that you answered my question. I don't mean to cut you off, but I know that there's other people that have questions. So I think that did answer that question. The next person whose hand is not up, but because he's a co-host, is Dr. Olson, the vice chair. So I'm putting him in the queue next. Dr. Olson.
Thank you, Mimi. I just want to say I have a great deal of sympathy for Mr. Hart as a campaign manager for a city council race that I'm running here in Hanford, California. And I know that this is a crucial time, and stopping your campaign at this time, it does affect the campaign, even if people are sympathetic, because we all know that a lot of voters, most voters, in fact, tend to be low information voters. And so not campaigning at this time does make an impact, I believe. And I think personally, I think it's very unfortunate that there would be any interpretation of the Hatch Act in this way, saying that just because an opponent gets the endorsement of a political party, it is now a partisan race. I think that's absurd and ridiculous, and I would hope that that ends up not being the case, but we really won't know unless we put this all the way through. And I personally would not be in favor of endorsing Mr. Alpay at this time. Nothing personally against Mr. Alpay himself. He may very well be a good libertarian. I don't know. But I think that using the Hatch Act in this way, personally, I think is poor judgment for a libertarian candidate. I think that limiting the choices of the voters of San Juan Capistrano is a very poor taste, and I personally don't view it as a good libertarian action, and I therefore will be voting against the endorsement of Mr. Alpay at this time. Thank you.
If there aren't any other XCOM members who want to discuss, I'm inclined to do that thing where you call the thing. Okay, I'm going to be that guy and call the question.
I'm going to second.
Madam Chair, are you still there or do we lose you?
Brent, do you make the call?
Oh,
if he's not
shit.
there?
I am so sorry. I thought that I was talking and I realized I was muted. I apologize. This is why I don't like Zoom meetings. Okay. Calling of the question does not require a second, but it does require, is there any objection to calling the question? Is there anybody on this board that objects to calling the question? Okay, hearing none, the question has been called and we will go to an immediate. Mr. Prosser,
Yeah.
your hand is up.
Preliminary point. I just want to make sure that that I was counted in the roll call because I switched from phone to computer and I missed part of that, and just want to make sure that I was marked here for the count.
You were in the initial roll call and I've seen you here the whole time, so I do believe you're here. And by you talking, you're definitely here, so yeah, you're here. Okay, so there was no objection to calling the question. Therefore, we will go to an immediate vote. Just so everybody who is not necessarily aware of our rules knows, endorsement requires a supermajority of all voting members, which means that it would need 10 votes in favor of endorsement. And I'm going to ask the secretary to do the roll call. Please do it in alphabetical order with the chair last.
Okay, Mr. Dawson.
I abstain.
Art's hand's up.
I understand that, but the question has been called. And once the question has been called with no objection, we move to an immediate vote. And Mr. Sanchez is not a voting member of this body, and Ms. McCardle called the question with no objection.
My hand was up at the same time that
I
Howard's
understand
hand.
that.
Okay.
Mr. Sanchez, I see the hands in the order that they are. Mr. Hart's was before yours. Then the person after that was somebody asking a specific question for Mr. Hart. So, and you are not a voting member of this body, so therefore it has to be at the indulgence of this body. I don't mean to be persnippety, but that is the way that these meetings work. And unfortunately, once the question's been called with no objection, we go to immediate vote, which is where we're at. So right now, we are at a roll call vote for endorsement of Mr. Appley. Is that clear? Mr. Secretary, if you could start over.
Okay, we had an abstention from Mr. Dawson. The next voting member is Mr. Flores.
Abstain.
Mr. Haug.
Vote no.
Ms. Hewitt.
No.
Ms. Nix.
Abstain.
Sorry, I had you down under your previous name, so that's why you're not quite alphabetical. Ms. McCardle.
Abstain.
Was that an abstain?
You can.
Yes, that was an expressed abstention.
Thank you. Ms. Morrow.
No.
Mr. Nelson.
Abstain.
Ms. Olson.
No.
Dr. Olson.
No.
Mr. Prosser.
I vote no.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, you still with us?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I abstained.
Okay, I am voting no. Back to our seated alternate, Mr. Fast.
No.
That leaves us with, let me double check here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 no's. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 expressed abstentions, no yeses. Madam Chair, are you going to vote?
No, I'm not going to vote. The chair is not voting. The motion for, the motion for endorsement has failed. Therefore, Mr. Alpay has not been endorsed by the Libertarian Party of California. I want to thank everybody for being on this call. I think that this was a very unfortunate thing to have happen. And I'm not casting any aspersions against anybody, but at this point, Mr. Alpay's not been endorsed by the Libertarian Party of California. So that concludes the agenda. So therefore, it would be therefore we are now adjourned at 9:31. Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
I'm ending the meeting for all.